Hello, and welcome to the ALCTS Webinar on More Than Citations and Impact Factors, altmetric.com. I'm Felipe, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. We have three presenters today. Sara Rouhi is a member of the altmetrics team. Terrie Moffitt is a professor at Duke University and is an altmetric user. Alyson Williams, also an altmetrics user, is a librarian at the Inter-American Development Bank. So we're very lucky to have these three experts with us today. So a few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. We don't have interactive chat capabilities, and all attendees are muted. So if you wish to comment among each other about the presentation, you can do that using Twitter. The hashtag is on the screen. But if you have questions or comments for our presenters, please type them into the question box. And we'll get to those at the end of the presentations. Questions which we don't get to will be answered offline, and we'll send those to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation this week. And now here's Sara.
Hello all, and thank you so much again to ALCTS for giving altmetric.com the opportunity to share a little bit about what we do, how we do it, and a couple of case studies with Dr. Moffitt and with Alyson. Again, my name is Sara Rouhi, and I'm the product specialist for Altmetric in North America. I'm based out of Washington, D.C., and I'll do about a 10 to 12-minute overview of how we collect our data, what we do, and then Terrie and Alyson will do a little bit more of a deep dive into how they are actually using our data. Again, if you have any questions, I think the chat box is where you can type in your questions, and I'll also be live tweeting the subsequent session of Terrie's and Alyson's. So just a little bit of an introduction. This is my contact information. Feel free to send me a tweet, to email me, and again, I'm based in Washington, D.C. Before you can really start any kind of discussion about altmetrics, it's kind of important to see where the genesis of altmetric data kind of came from and why there was suddenly a need for it. A big reason for this was because of the shift online of many of the conversations that all of us were having in the lab, at the water cooler, amongst colleagues at conferences. Many of those conversations that would lead to new collaboration, new findings, new sharing of resources have all moved online. And not only have they moved online, in addition to obviously still happening day-to-day, face-to-face, many of them are trackable, are traceable. So we're looking at 35,000 online mentions of scholarly articles a day. We're looking at 137,000 unique articles shared a week. This is a tremendous amount of volume of scholarly material being passed back and forth, being shared amongst colleagues, being shared with the general public, with members of the media, with practitioners who would use the data, whether it's in healthcare or law or education. So research is now reaching so many more, not only peers, other researchers, but other practitioners and members of the public. And now we can track that, and that's why altmetrics have started to become an exciting area to benchmark other things researchers are doing besides publishing. One of the reasons they're popular is because of the lag time of traditional metrics. Most of us know that if you want to get citation data, if you want to get an impact factor, you're often waiting years for those things to accrue. You're looking at a screenshot here of Nature Communications. All of the Nature journals use our altmetric donut, that circular badge you can see on the right. And Nature does a really nice job of juxtaposing these traditional metrics alongside alternative metrics. And so while you can see total citations for this relatively recent article, this article came out in the last 4 months, are nothing because it's a new article. The online attention to this article from the news, from Twitter, from Facebook, and from blogs is already quite tremendous. And if I was the author and I needed to write a grant proposal this week, this is data that I can use that's current about the status of this article, whereas I might have to wait months or even years for the left side of the screen to light up. Funders are definitely noticing, and I think this is something that Terrie will speak to in her portion of the presentation. They're increasingly, obviously there's less and less money around to give researchers. We see, being based in DC, sequestration has had actually a very direct impact on places like NIH, based in Bethesda. Grant funders are increasingly asking researchers to not only demonstrate that your research is relevant and timely to other researchers in the field, they also want researchers to demonstrate that their work is of interest and value to the general public, very often to the taxpayer. This requires different kinds of metrics other than saying other researchers cited me. Being able to demonstrate that your work is being used in education, is being looked at by legislative bodies, is being looked at by advocacy groups, nonprofits, think tanks. All of these things help make a case that your research is touching more than just other researchers. And so funders are increasingly using altmetric data to help assess if their grant money is going to the kinds of outreach that they would like to see with respect to research. So just a really quick definition that most of the altmetric providers out there, I think we generally agree on. Altmetrics are an alternative, not a replacement. They're a complement. They're an alternative, more immediate measure of impact from non-traditional sources, policy documents, blogs, the mainstream media, social media, to provide a larger context. So the idea here is not that traditional citations are not important, but rather that they only provide part of the picture. Altmetrics can help fill in the remainder of that picture that is simply not going to be documented through journal-level metrics. A couple of important things to point out here. Immediate is really important term. Altmetrics are a measure of immediacy. So while citations can take years to accrue, altmetrics generally accrue at the article level within 5 to 10 days of publication. So again, when you need data now about what's happening with your research right now, often this data will be more helpful to many researchers than the more traditional metrics. Non-traditional is important. There are numerous altmetric providers out there. We at altmetric.com specifically focus on a set number of non-traditional sources, and I'll talk about those. So the sources that we look at exclude things like usage and downloads. We exclude things like holdings. We also exclude different sort of social media engagement that we find is not auditable and therefore not useful. So I'll talk about some of that momentarily, but it's important when you're looking at different providers to understand which sources they're going to, which they're tracking and why they're tracking them. So who are we? At bottom, we are a data science company. The data that we provide is really the bread and butter of what we do, and it's what we do really, really well. Ultimately, we're tracking attention to research outputs. Research outputs could be articles, they could be data sets. They could be anything really with a persistent identifier. We're tracking attention to those identifiers and then delivering article or output level metrics in a way that's easy to understand, easy to ingest and, show to others, whether you're doing grant proposals or internal assessment, and easy to teach others. I think as librarians, you're always the first kind of line of defense of explaining how these new technologies and tools work. And our data makes it very easy for you to do that job. Because ultimately the bottom line here is we want to give credit where credit is due. If a researcher is working in a field where journal articles just aren't the primary currency of communication, maybe books are, maybe data sets are, maybe software is more important, this is a way to help them get credit for the work they're doing. So that's the way to really think of what we do. We provide the data for anyone in the research community to make that case for credit where credit is due. So because we are a data science company, the sources that we pull data from have got to be high quality, and highly relevant. And we think we actually do this very well. We track over 1,300 different news outlets, from The Guardian to China News Daily to Le Monde, international coverage of all of the major news sources that research typically gets found in, and that list is growing all the time. Post-publication peer-reviewed sites like Publons and PubPeer are two new spaces that we've started tracking, which are particularly interesting for folks who want to see what the engagement with their content is on the research side after it's published. We're looking at reference managers like Mendeley, social media, and blogs. We track over 8,000 academic blogs, and that list is growing all the time. And we have a number of other sources that we're tracking, the newest one and the one that we're most excited about being policy documents. And policy documents are that one of the pieces of gray literature where, really before the advent of online access to these tools, you really could never have known if you were getting attention in these spaces other than manually going and reading every single policy document from every potential group that could produce them. We're currently ingesting a number from the UK, so this list predominantly is UK right now. The next round will be US policy documents and Canada as well as Europe. So now when you go into our data, you can see if the Red Cross, the IMF, Doctors Without Borders have cited your research in their policy recommendations. And that's a very different kind of engagement that demonstrates reach than citations or a news mention or a tweet. So we think this is one of the pieces that's going to be really compelling to libraries and researchers as they think about assessment. So I said we're a data science company, we're tracking attention, and we're giving it to you in a way that is hopefully easy to understand. So now I have to explain how we actually do that. What you're looking at right here is what we call the details page. Every single article that has a donut on it, you can click on that donut and a page like this will pop up. So I do encourage you, if you ever see a donut or you see the altmetric brick, there's a number of different ways that you can have altmetric data on a journal page or in a repository. Click on it because it'll take you to this page. And what you're looking at first on the left is the donut, which is basically just a color key for the attention sources that you're receiving. So every source has a color. The colors always stay the same. So if your donut is predominantly red, it means you got most of your mentions in the news. If it's predominantly yellow, you mostly got it in blogs. We break it down here for you at the bottom so you can see the exact number, 3 news outlets, 1 blog, 1 policy source. So again, if you're colorblind or if you're not clear on what the colors are, you have the sort of a key down there. We then also break out each source with its own tab, and this is the part where the robust data is really important. We believe that data needs to be fully transparent and fully auditable. That means if we tell you 3 news outlets are covering you, you need to be able to go and read every single news outlet. You should be able to read every policy document, every tweet, every Facebook post. And so each tab gives you all of that in an attempt to allow you to craft the story around the attention to your article, because let's face it, it's possible to get attention for really great research, but it's also possible to get attention because your research has been deemed controversial or fraudulent or unethical. So this is why the data behind the numbers is really important, not just the numbers themselves. But let's explain the donut again. So as you can see, we have about 14 different kinds of sources, so 14 potential colors that your donut can have. At a glance, the colors tell you a lot. More colors mean more sources of attention. Fewer colors, a donut with 1 or 2 will only have had 1 or 2 sources of attention. The score is, in the middle of the donut, is not a sum of all of the sources, but rather it's a weighted algorithm that's triangulating the number of times an article has been mentioned, where it's been mentioned, the sources, and how often the author of that mention is actually involved in scholarly communication of some kind. So that algorithm leads to the score. Again, a high score means more attention, a low score means less. But again, until you know what the nature of that attention is, AKA, are people saying good things? Are they saying bad things? The score doesn't mean anything without the context, and that's why this details page is really important to look at. You never just want to look at the score without the context. Every details page also has a demographics tab, which will show you Twitter attention and the geographical breakdown, as well as demographics. Are you having members of the public talking about you, practitioners, scientists, science journalists? We try to break out demographics for you. Additionally, you'll scroll down and we give you Mendeley readership. And Mendeley is interesting because it's often considered a very good indicator of potential future citations. It's also a really good indicator of scholarly use, right? Because people using Mendeley tend to be other people working in your field. So we break it out for you by readers by discipline as well as readers by professional status. And again, every details page will have a demographics tab, just like this, that you can click on. We also give you some benchmarking around the score. Because the score itself doesn't mean anything without the context of the data, we try to provide a bit of context for you. So we give you a comparison ranking to all of the articles in that same journal of that same age, in that journal, and then of course across our 2.5 million articles in our database. So if you are happy with the data behind the score and you want to make a case for how highly your article ranks within our database, we've given you some ways to do that. Ultimately, all of this detail, the article details page, are helping you tell a story. Whether you're a librarian who's trying to make a case for a purchasing decision, researcher trying to make a case for tenure and promotion, a department chair trying to make a case for hiring a new postdoc or a new professor, these are the stories the details can tell you. What kind of attention are you getting? Where is the article receiving most traction? What countries or communities or audiences are engaging with the content? Are some of them unexpected? Has the article influenced policy, legislation, education, and generally what are the reactions to this content? And Terrie will get into some really nice examples of this in her portion of the presentation. Just to hit this message home one more time, it's important to remember that the data does not speak to quality but rather attention. So articles with no score and no colors in the donut simply very often are in fields that are not always the most sexy fields. So analytical chemistry is a very important field. Often those articles just don't have as much attention as neuroscience or nanoscience or applied materials or some of these other spaces. So the score and the number are not telling you the whole story by any means, because the context behind that data absolutely matters. We've got institutions using this data, and Alyson really represents a very specific kind of special library with the Inter-American Development Bank, but we have everything from places like IDB all the way to Cambridge University, corporations, think tanks, and government agencies. A lot of institutions are using this data because it's a way to demonstrate the value of existing investments. So many of you have spent a lot of money, time, and personnel on creating an institutional repository, on buying a discovery system of some kind to create, a unified search experience for your users. Our badges are freely available for you to integrate with those existing systems. So if you have questions about that or you want to explore that, we should absolutely talk. But this is one way to reinvest in the tools that you have and bring back attention to the value-added services the library brings. Altmetric for Institutions is our institutional product. It's where quite a bit of the data that you'll see from both Terrie and Alyson came from. It basically pulls out the data at your specific institution from our database and provides you individual, departmental, and institutional level analytics, which I can show you at some point. But I don't want to go over my time too much longer, so I'm going to stop here. Again, I am at Sara at altmetric.com. Altmetric is our Twitter handle, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Terrie Moffitt. I am a university professor and a researcher in the fields of mental health and neuroscience. I just discovered, let's see, I am not able to make the Slides go forward. Do I have control over the
Terrie,
PowerPoint?
just try
Yep.
click on the slide, Terrie, and see if that'll do it for you.
Nope. Okay. Looks like I've done something. Okay, we'll try that again. Okay, I only learned about altmetrics just a few weeks ago, actually, when a former student sent to me the information about the bookmarklet and said, "This is really ultra cool. You got to try this." And what the bookmarklet is basically a free bookmark that you add to your browser, and it shows you altmetric data for any article with an identifier if that article has gotten attention. No, it's not moving now. Do you think, can someone else move the slide? Okay. Right, so yeah, so this one is showing you, I'm getting sort of I'm confused here. At any rate, we wanted to look at the bookmarklet because it's very cool. And there you can see where you, in the red circle, where you add it to your toolbar, and then it allows you to visit any article of your choice. The red circle will pop up. All right, and there's an arrow, and then you can just click on the bookmark and the article details will drop down, as you see here. So you see those details listed on the right-hand side of the screen. If you click on the little place that says click for more details there, then you get the details page appears, and you can read every news mention and policy document mention and blog post and tweet for that article. This service is totally free. You can get it at altmetric.it, and it's a good way to play around with altmetrics. And here you can see the details page that you get. But I started doing this article by article, and I looked up some of my own articles because, of course, I was curious, and then I looked up some of the articles that were published by my competitors because I was curious how they were doing as well. But I thought article by article just wasn't enough. What I wanted was a way to summarize impact across all of the publications from my lab. Or, for example, if I was writing a progress report for a grant to a funding agency, I wanted to be able to summarize the impact across all of the papers published under that grant. Or, since my department is being reviewed this year by the university, I wanted to be able to report what is the impact of all of the articles published by all of the faculty in the psychology department. Or if we have some job applicants applying for assistant professor positions, it would be wonderful for me to be able to go in and check altmetrics to see what is the impact that this young researcher is making, because a young researcher might not have much of an H index yet. So that would allow me to check their immediate impact right before the job interview. So I couldn't figure out how to do this kind of a summarization, so I went to the Altmetrics website and I sent them, where it says contact us, I sent a question. I said, how do I see my research in aggregate? And Sara Rouhi, who you've already met, was the person who answered my email. Right, so here we're seeing some of my papers. Here's one about obesity that she showed me, the Altmetrics 4. And then this is a paper about cannabis and neuropsychological decline, and you can see that it's done extremely well in Altmetrics. So if you look at the top right-hand side, you see that's quite impressive. So mainly what I was motivated by when talking with Sara was the idea that I need to be able to make the case to the funding agencies who support my research that we are making a broader impact beyond just the ivory tower. So here you see a quote from the National Science Foundation's current policy. They're asking of grant holders, will the results be disseminated broadly to enhance scientific and technological understanding? My research is funded by the New Zealand Health Research Council, the UK Medical Research Council, and Economic and Social Research Council, and the American National Institute of Health. All four of those funding agencies are asking me to document impact. And what I've been having to do right now is scan the internet myself, try to find evidences of impact, and carefully type those in by hand, one by one, to these capture sites that the funding agencies have. And this is killing me. So I don't want to do this anymore. So I was very excited about the potential that Altmetric would help me. So here's what the Altmetric for Institutions was able to show me about my own research lab's publications. So during the time that Altmetrics has been recording, I've had mentions about 82 different articles that have been published from my lab, from myself and my students. There's been a total of 2,933 mentions across all different sources for these 82 articles. And 118 newspaper article evidences of coverage. Something that I had no idea was the different policy documents. So 3 policy documents, and as Sara said, these are primarily from the UK so far, but they'll be adding American ones soon. And then I saw, to my surprise, Twitter coverage of my research. I have not been a Twitter user myself. I'm kind of an old person. So I was interested to see, well, what's going on there. Down at the bottom, you can also see a chart of the mentions of those 82 articles over the course of time. So you can see when they're being mentioned month by month. And what's going on here, you can see that something happened in my lab. Something happened in June 2013 and in July 2014 that made people interested in the research coming out of my research group. Because we do research on cannabis, one of these spikes, I can tell you, was when Colorado started to legalize cannabis, and so lots of bloggers were then consulting the research literature on what are the potential advantages and disadvantages of smoking cannabis. So this was something that was very exciting to me. I can look at timing, I can strategize, I can look here at the policy coverage, so I can delve in and see what government documents are and policy documents are covering my work. So here we see the Mental Health Foundation, the UK government, charities. So this is great. Now I can report this back to the Medical Research Council and the Economic and Social Research Council, and it saved me a huge amount of time and digging. And I found things on Altmetrics that I could never have found myself. One of the things that my funding agencies and, in fact, my university are constantly asking is the results of your research strictly local? Is it that it's of interest to people here on campus, or maybe here in the state, or in the local, just inside the United States, or does it have reach beyond our borders? So what you can see here with the green bars, this is showing you the top 10 articles that I have from my research lab in Altmetrics, and the green bar shows you where we have international reach. So some of our mentions are coming from outside the United States. So that's very exciting to me, and I can report that as evidence of our international visibility. There's also indicators of broader impact that we can cover with international blog coverage. So here you see that researchers, doctors, patients, general public actively using blogs as ways to learn more and disseminate findings and find solutions about mental illness and substance abuse in their everyday lives. So some of my articles I saw were very bloggable. You can see that article number 1 and article number 2 and article number 10 are very bloggable. So I realized these are all articles that have to do with substance abuse, with drug abuse. So that seems to be a topic that is appealing to bloggers. Articles 7, 8, and 9 are generally not mentioned in blogs, and those are my articles that are about methodological aspects of my research. They tend to be kind of dry and statistical. So I can actually strategize about what kinds of papers to publish in order to attract attention. This allows me to go in through altmetrics to a deeper level to really see who these bloggers and tweeters are. So you can actually see who's using the research. And you can see there's a public health lawyer and ethicist. Here we have someone from the Nashville, Tennessee Public Health Department. These are the kinds of blog coverages and tweet coverages that my research is getting. This slide showed me something that's really quite amazing, and that is the upward bound of Twitter reach. So what that means is it's plotting here the maximum number of Twitter followers who might have potentially seen a tweet that mentioned one of the articles from my lab. And this is for the top 10 articles. And again, you can see that this article number 1, the one about undesirable side effects of cannabis use, is being tweeted hugely and is potentially reaching a lot of people. So even though tweets go out, we know that not everybody reads them, but what you can say is instead of probably having 3,941,000 tweet views, even if 1% of the people did click on the article, that would be more eyes than would have seen it before Twitter. This is an article that came out of the University of Wisconsin. It's called Building Buzz. And this is useful that Sara turned me on to this article, and I've been using it with my younger colleagues, my postdoctoral fellows, my graduate students, and assistant professors, because many of them are very reluctant to engage with journalists. They're timid about it, and they just are kind of fearful. And I think what we need to do is try to give them evidence that it really does pay off to reach out to the public. So from the abstract of that article, we can see that what they found was public communication, such as interaction with reporters or being mentioned on Twitter, can contribute to a scholar's scientific impact. So being mentioned on Twitter amplifies the effects of interactions with journalists and other non-scientists on the scholar's scientific impact. Basically, the bottom line is more Twitters today translates into a higher H-index inside a few years. And this is something that young colleagues are listening to. So the bottom line that I wanted to tell you is that altmetrics is already making me look better. I've turned in my progress report for this year to the National Institute of Health, and the program manager said this altmetric data is fantastic, and we're going to use this information for our budget report. So now she felt that she could go with the altmetric data up the food chain to the very top of NIH to say what kind of impact her branch of the National Institute of Aging is making. We're always learning more things that we can do with altmetrics, so me and my, my younger colleagues are talking about what we can learn from altmetrics. One of the things we learned is that our methodology papers were getting attention on Twitter. They're, of course, too boring for newspapers, and these methodology papers are heavily statistical and very hard to penetrate. They take a long time to get any citations. But what I could see in the Twitter coverage is on altmetrics is that apparently the younger generation of scientists who use Twitter are actually tweeting about these heavy methodological tomes. So that was kind of interesting to me. The other thing that we've been thinking about is a way to use altmetrics in our classrooms. So what we've learned how to do is put altmetrics up on the on the board, on the video screen, and the undergraduate students can use keywords to search what are the most talked about publications on a particular topic. We tried fracking, for example. We'll get the 10 most talked about, the 10 most articles that have the most attention paid to them according to Altmetrics, and the students get very excited about then going forward and making their own reading list for the course and reading those papers and debating them. So it's created a real buzz in my classroom already. We can see firsthand the impact of the internet in disseminating life-changing research. So thank you very much for listening to this, and we'll pass on to the next presenter, Alyson.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, great. I will try and get back to the beginning of the presentation. Sorry. So again, I'm Alyson Williams. I am the head of the reference team as well as the subject and embedded librarian teams here at the Inter-American Development Bank, or the IDB, which is an institution that loves acronyms almost as much, if not more, than librarians. So our library is fairly different, being a corporate library. So we focus our services mainly on the internal researchers, or as we call them, specialists here at the bank. A little bit of background on the IDB itself. It is the largest lender to Latin America and the Caribbean of development funding. Our researchers are working on everything from on topics from health to gender and diversity to climate change, renewable energy, financial services to the most vulnerable, citizen security, regional integration. The list goes on and on. So we have a wide range of topics here. The bank has 48 member countries. 26 of them, you can see them in green, are the 26 borrowing member countries in the region. There are 22 other countries from around the world who also make up the membership of the bank. Headquarters are based in Washington, D.C. So a little bit about the Felipe Herrera Library, or FHL. So we have taken over recently the process of publication and management of the institutional repository. Before that, publishing and disseminating documents was extremely decentralized throughout the bank. So each department would be in charge of creating, editing, disseminating their own research, and it was a very sort of hard to keep track of who was publishing what was available where. And so they started putting together an institutional repository. We aren't a large publisher, but almost everything that we publish in-house, and it's all, recently it's been all available electronically. Housed in our institutional repository BRIC, again the Bank Repository of Institutional Knowledge, which uses DSpace as its platform, and that was transferred to the library in 2012. And so my team of subject and embedded librarians, we work to implement and ensure compliance with the publications manual of the bank. The role of embedded librarian was created here as a pilot in just earlier this year, February of 2014, to have a specific librarian working with the top 3 publishing departments of the bank to help them go through this slightly complicated process of making sure that they have all of the metadata correct, that they have their CIP data and everything that they need to make sure that the reports and publications that they put together are then actually findable. And of course, now that we've centralized the publications process and we have a much better rate of findability and people are able to more easily disseminate their publications, and that our publications are now being pushed through to Google and to Bing, as well as other repositories, institutional repositories in Latin America, we want to know what the impact is. What is the impact? So we started with the basics, of course. What is the easiest? So downloads. We have that information as a part of our DSpace platform. We can measure that. This year we've also had a big push of getting all of the specialists to sign up for Google Scholar accounts so that we can begin to, and so that the specialists themselves can actually track their own citations. And so we're continuing to explore what are the other ways of measuring the impact. And as Sara said, citations take time to gather, whereas going through social media can be an instant way of seeing who's actually talking about the publication, which is extremely important for the bank. So a little bit of history of how we actually started working with Altmetric. My colleague last year was actually at a conference about open repositories in Canada and went up and started chatting with the Altmetric folk. And after he got back from the conference, he went back to work to finish up putting together our repository handle. And so once that was done and the new external website was launched that had all of the public documents that we have in our repository, we reached out to Altmetric back in March to begin to see what could Altmetric offer, how could we use it, and how could we begin to incorporate it. So from there, I took over the process of getting set up, so making sure that Altmetric could pick up the IDB handle, which was sort of the easiest step. Though there are complications using a handle from DSpace, as I'll go over in a little bit. But the second thing took a little bit longer, which was making sure establishing clear expectations in terms of what I could expect from Altmetric, as well as what was the data that I could get about IDB publications, especially since it was sort of a cumulative process of, okay, first we have 5 publications of the bank out of 7,000 that are available in Altmetric, and sort of becoming more clear about how long would it take for the mentions that I knew existed to be picked up by Altmetric. So there was a lot of back and forth to make sure that I understood and that I could report back to the Chief of Library Services here so that she could head up the food chain with this information. And occasionally, as you can see here, given time differences and the difficulty of sort of communication through email via time differences, I took to Twitter to email Altmetric, or to tweet Altmetric directly, and that actually turned out to be a fairly effective way to get much more, a much faster response. And this was before Sara had taken over and had started working here in the same time zone as me. So the story so far, again, some of the challenges that we've had is with our own repository platform, DSpace. Because we have a handle in DSpace, doesn't really work well with DOI. There have unfortunately, there would be more functionalities available with the DOI, but because we are having to use handles, that limits the mentions that Altmetric captures to those that actually include the link itself. So anytime a news source or a tweeter or a blog mentions the name of a publication and author, even that it was published by the IDB, but if it doesn't have the link that includes the handle, unfortunately that mention is missed. So there was a lot of going back and forth at the beginning to see if there was an alternative way to do that, because these were important mentions that specialists were coming to me saying, hey, I see that we have this available in a blog. Why is that not picked up in Altmetric? There are also another limitation. Maybe it's not a limitation, but given that the IDB works in development and we aren't doing hard science per se, the breakdown of demographics is challenging for us because it's limited to scientists, doctors. There's a very strong bias towards the sciences. And so all of the people who would be mentioning IDB publications would be under the general category of general public. And so it would be, what would be nice to see eventually, and again, I'm not sure, Sara can maybe speak to this, putting her on the spot here, to see if there would be a way to expand into other categories of, like, if there's a development practitioners or something like that, a way to capture sort of the other non-science audience. But what is really great about the demographic breakdown is that we can actually see geographically where in Latin America specifically are our publications being mentioned. Is Colombia particularly interested about this publication in transport? Has Chile been talking about the most recent publication that talks about education in Chile? So that's a very positive thing there. We did run into some issues related to Spanish language titles and sort of system errors. So we could see here that part of the title of the Spanish title, and it only happened with Spanish titles, would get cut off, but that again was very easy to sort of fix without too much hassle. And one of the things I think that was mutually beneficial, both for Altmetric as well as for the IDB, was to include the large number of regional newspapers that the IDB had gathered as a list and passed that to Altmetric, and then Altmetric added those into their own system. And so now all of those Latin American and Caribbean news sources are being tracked by Altmetric, which means that as we're being mentioned in the region, Altmetric is able to pick those up. We've also passed on new blogs, regional blogs, Spanish language blogs, some Portuguese blogs, or Portuguese language, I should say. They are Brazilian. So just to sort of expand into their news sources. Finally, sort of looking to so sort of where are we now? We've done presentations, or I've done presentations to my own department about Altmetric. So they're at least aware and interested in the possibilities, and they see the value of including this as metrics going forward. The number of publications is up from the beginning. It started off very, very slowly, which was a little worrisome, especially when I'm trying to show results to my boss. We're exploring new sources. So communities of practice are a source of material that have become more and more important in Latin America. And so I'm in discussion with Sara about, is it possible to track communities of practice, recognizing that there are challenges related to closed communities versus open communities. Last week, completely independent from any discussions that I've had, a specialist from the social sector spoke with her embedded librarian saying, hey, I'm very interested in Altmetric. We want to get we'd like to see a report comparing what is the reach of Altmetric versus the citations in Google Scholar. to see how different types of publications are tracked in different ways. And again, this also goes back to Sara's point that the citations take a while to accumulate. And with Altmetric, especially with recent publications, you can see the impact much more immediately. Finally, thinking more long-term would be, looking and exploring the possibility of adding donuts to our external publications page, recognizing that there are maybe some technical difficulties with DSpace, as well as making sure our Office of External Relations is on board with that. A couple of things that would be I would be interested in learning more about would be tracking the data sets, because our data sets are also available through our repository. And I know the specialists who create data sets would be very interested in their impact, as well as maybe, Sara, if not next year, but the year after, we could begin looking at sources for policy documents from Latin America and the Caribbean. And so with that, I will go ahead and wrap up to leave time for questions at the end. But if you have any questions about our experiences or challenges, you can feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. So just to go over our presenters again, we have Sara Rouhi, who's from altmetrics.com company. Terrie Moffitt is using the individual data she gets in Altmetrics. She's a faculty member at Duke University. And Alyson Williams is getting the institutional side. She's at the Inter-American Development Bank. So if you have questions for any of these, post them. And let me get us started. A question for Sara. What are the actual mechanics for gathering data? How does Altmetrics monitor blogs?
That's a fantastic question. Thanks for it. The very top level explanation of that is basically we are, through a process of manual and automatic mining, we are looking for links to articles or certain repositories that we track. So if we find a link that usually pushes us to either Archive or Nature or American Political Science Journal, whatever journal the article sits in, and on that page we find some kind of persistent identifier. So that might be a DOI, it could be a handle, it could be a PubMed ID, it could be a RepEc ID. There are about 20 persistent identifiers that we track. And when we find that, we then use the persistent identifier to disambiguate this article from a copy of it that might be somewhere else. And then we pull all of the data around that identifier together to put into the donut to both give the score and give you those details on that details page. So generally, on the automatic side, we're looking for links because most people obviously don't share a DOI or they don't share a RepEc ID, but they will share a link to an article, and usually in the metadata we can find the identifier that we need. Now, to Alyson's point, in the case of outlets like policy documents and news sources that are actually, we're using text mining, because often in those spaces they're not saying, Terrie Moffitt from Duke University, they're saying an interesting piece of research on marijuana use in children, blah, 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 from Duke. And in that case, because they don't link to the article or even necessarily mention the author, we are doing really, really complex data mining to determine the date of the publication, the journal the publication was in, ideally who the author is, and then we're using that to map against databases that have the articles that we're tracking in them. So it's a mixture of sort of manual and automatic curation. Blogs specifically, our blog list grows based on feedback from our users, based on feedback from researchers, and existing knowledge that we have within our company. That list is growing all the time, and we're generally looking for academic blogs. So and we define that as any blog where the predominant content is related to academic research or scholarly communication, and or the blogger themselves is a researcher who is engaged, commonly in this space. That's a long answer. I apologize.
Thank you. Question for Terrie. Terrie, because a lot of academic places really are looking at publications and citation counts, can you see how are you able to use this data in showing your contribution, and can you see universities changing more to look at this kind of data?
I do think universities are going to pick this up, and can give you a couple of examples. I've talked to the provost's office here at Duke University because one of the difficulties that we have in our promotion and tenure committee is when you have a young person who has only been working in the field for 5 or 6 years, relying on things like the H-index often doesn't work out very well, so they haven't had time to have their work cited, especially if they took a long time to get their lab up and running and their publications are just now coming out. So the provost was interested in the notion that mentions captured on altmetrics might be a good predictor. They reflect short-term impact, but they might be a good predictor of eventual longer-term impact. So this kind of information could be used in the context of a promotion and tenure case of a young faculty member if it was borderline and people were wanting a little bit extra information about impact. So that's one way. Another way that it's being, there's interest at Duke University is by the Sanford Policy School, because the Policy School, whereas it is full of academics, and academics all publish their articles in academic scholarly journals, they're also supposed to have policy impact. And it's been very difficult for them to be able to prove to the university that the faculty in the policy school are actually affecting how things happen in Raleigh, North Carolina, or Washington, D.C. So I think that they're exceptionally keen on altmetrics for that very reason, for the coverage of the policy relevant documents in the blogs and the newspaper articles. So I think some departments on campuses will be more keen on altmetrics than others, but I can already see that there's a lot of people talking about it here on my campus.
Thank you. So do you have an institutional account, or does everyone participate in it, or are you unique?
You know, I don't know if we have our institutional account set up yet or not. When I contacted Sara a few weeks ago with my question, we didn't have an institutional account at Duke, but I've since talked to the librarian, and the chief media and press officer is very keen on it, and so I think that there is something afoot. The account may be open already. I'm just not sure, but I know we're going to get it.
Great, thank you. Another question. To get aggregate data like Terrie used, one must create an altmetric for institutional account? That's a question. At what level is this done?
That is a great question. There are a couple of ways to get data. So what Terrie was using initially was the bookmarklet, which is something you can download from our website, altmetric.it. We'll take you straight to that. And that'll show you your article by article level metrics. If you want to pull them together in aggregate, you do need an institutional account. And I pulled that together for Terrie based on her question. We do have trial access to the institutional product that people can get for 30 days. And if it's okay, Felicity, I can send an email to everyone who attended with that information. If they want to sign up to play in the demo. It's basically a demo platform of the institutional product. And additionally, librarians are welcome to a free librarian account that they can set up. It will not have an institutional overlay. It will just be the entire database. But that will allow you to at least get in and start playing with it, particularly if you want to make a case for purchasing the institutional edition.
Great. Yeah, we can include that in the email we send out. Can you tell me what other companies provide this kind of service?
Great question. Let's see. There's a bunch of players in the altmetric space. You may have heard of Impact Story. Impact Story is largely focuses on the individual researcher and has a subscription of like a $5 a month fee to help make a custom CV for researchers. So they license all of their altmetric data from us. So we work with them. Another one is known in the UK as Kudos, and obviously known here as Kudos. They're a new company that's come out that helps researchers promote their work to these kinds of outlets in the hope that they can then acquire mentions to raise their altmetric data and profiles. And we also license to them a fair number of data. So that's Kudos, that's K-U-D-O-S, as well as Impact Story. Plum Analytics is probably the closest competitor to us in terms of exactly what they offer. And they've just been acquired by EBSCO, and they also offer an institutional level overview. And there's a number of different there's a number of differences between how we do it and how they do it, but those would be the main three that I would think of right off the bat. Another place to look would be PLOS, Public Library of Science. They have an article level metrics system that they've created for all of their journals that's very, very good as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see. Well, we're out of time here. There's one more question about a bookmarklet not working for some publishers like JSTOR. So I wonder if that's something we can just send you offline. It sounds
Absolutely, I
specific
can
to
take
your
care of
product.
that. Generally, if you find the bookmarklet's not working, it's often due to a metadata issue, and again, just send it my way and I can help you out with that.
Alrighty. Terrie and Alyson, do you have any final words you want to give us before we close out here?
Can't think of anything. It's been very thorough.
Great.
I can't either. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I really appreciate your sharing how you're using this. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions and who participated today. We trust you found it useful. So you'll be getting from the ALCTS office a short online evaluation form. So please fill that out because we'll use that to plan future events. You'll also be getting a link to this recording and copies of the slides. So we have some additional webinars this fall, 2 on data, authority data in libraries, use of social media, and how to host a Preservation Week event. That one will be without charge. And you can see this spring we are already planning the series, and so that'll be up on the ALCTS website soon. So ALCTS also offers web courses. So these are 4 to 6 week courses with an instructor who works with people on these different topics. So I encourage you to go to the ALCTS website to look for those. I want to thank our tech support people, Emily in the ALCTS office and Mary Reeder, another member of the Continuing Education Committee. We couldn't do it without their support. So thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to your participation in other events in the future.